is Ran. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council for North Africa. And I'm very happy to be here with such a great panel and with all of you. Thank you very much for enduring and staying and looking forward to our panel. I'd like to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and ISPI for organizing this event that is really a milestone for all of us in our work and in our activities. I will not take too much time anymore. I would like to begin immediately to the panel of what is the future of the US in MENA, Middle East and North Africa. This is you are living an inflection point. You are living a moment of extreme difficulty, complexity, conflictuality, whatever you want to put it. The words cannot paint the situation. So we are trying to get as much help as possible from scholars, from policymakers, from opinion makers, to try to understand what is going on so that we can inform our constituencies as accurately as possible and lead a debate that allows us to get to the bottom of the issues rather than having disinformation or third-degree information probably decides for us what we want to do it. We have a panel, a very high-level panel, and I'm very proud to have these people with me to help us. First one is Ambassador Dobianski. You are a senior fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. But I really believe that your other hat is much more important as the vice chair of the Scowcroft Center, Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. That, not because I'm partisan, I'm just saying that. Can I ask you one question? I know you have been bombarded with questions since lunchtime, so I will ask you something now. What are the current geostrategic US goals in the Middle East, especially with regard to the US relations with China and Russia? What should we expect from Trump? The American point of view, what do you think is going to... I'm not asking you to have a crystal ball, just of your experience and knowledge of people, the knowledge of facts of the area. Shoot.
All right, well, buongiorno. I'd like to thank ISPI for inviting me here today. And also, I like the fact that Karim mentions my more important title, Atlantic Council, because we share that in common, by the way. So thank you for that advertisement for Atlantic Council, yes. Truly, I am grateful for their collaboration with ISPI. Let me go right to your question, and I'd like to make briefly just 4 points. First, the fact is what we will see is the United States will continue to confront what constitutes great power competition in the Middle East region. Certainly with respect to China, Russia, and by the way, also in that regard, also with regard to Iran. In fact, also related to that, you may know there's a new trend that is really being focused on, and it's relevant to the Middle East, and that is the alignment of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, called the CRINCs, the CRINC. And in this case, I would say that we see a trend where these countries are aligned in a number of cases in support of their specific goals and interests. But by the way, it doesn't mean that we will deal with them as a unit, a whole unit. We will deal with each individually, but they also are collaborating together. And that is a new trend to take a look at. The second point is with regard to China. China, as one looks at the future of the US in MENA, China has invested very heavily in the region, without a doubt. It will continue to pursue a very active Middle East strategy and to basically to carve out a greater role for itself. In this regard, we have seen in recent years, it was only in 2022, China basically established a special envoy to the Middle East. China also put forward a security architecture for the Middle East, which they released in 2022. We can expect to see that this will continue, and especially in terms of trade and the commercial relationship. In fact, the trade has gone up exponentially between China and the Middle Eastern countries. You can also expect that Russia will continue in the spirit of great power competition in terms of its relationships. Russia cares deeply about the relationship with Iran. Already the report of today is that some 188 drones came from Iran, which they used in their attack, one-day attack against Ukraine. And then also Iran also counts on Russia for military assets as well. And then, of course, there's the relationship between Russia and Syria. Its long-time naval asset there, which we can expect to continue. So there is that element of great power competition. I don't see that as shifting. Instead, I see that as continuing. And then the fourth is, of course, with regard to Trump and the US. Here, I don't speak for President Trump or the administration, but my own observation is the fact that President Trump has placed a priority and a premium on engagement with the region. If you look at the activity of the first term, as you know, in fact, President Trump's first trip outside as president, outside of the United States, was to Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Israel, and then he went to the Vatican. I think you can expect that to continue, Karim, and also with regard to Iran, the policy was maximum pressure. I haven't seen any divergence from that. China is also, I already mentioned, the engagement. China is high on the priorities. Already today, there was the announcement about tariffs, not only to Mexico and Canada, but towards China. And finally, let me say that the continued strong support for Israel. That is what I would define as going forward for the administration. And again, I don't speak for it, but that's my observation based on statements and what has been said and indicated thus far.
Yeah, these are milestones of his foreign policy, these points that you talked about. True. Now I have to go and ask a question to my dean, former dean, Vali Nasser, which is very good for me. Finally, I get to ask the question. And let's go back to what Ambassador Dominguez was talking about, Iran. Something nobody ever asks you about. Looking at the current stance and the perspective, as Ambassador Dominguez said, the new administration posture towards Iran, how do you see it's going to go? What do you think Trump is going to hit of the various nerves that form the relationship with Iran now? Is it going to exert maximum pressure? What kind of maximum pressure? Will it allow for an escalation? Will it prevent an escalation? Will it try to avoid an escalation? Is there fear from America of a regional war that is led by Iran? Or these are just fantasies? And he's just going to keep the same policy and no movement?
Well, thank you, Karim, my friend. It's much better I view as your friend rather than our professional relationship. Again, one cannot know exactly what the policy would be until the administration is in. There is a lot of speculation based on what the policy was the first term and then what it might be, but all evidence looking at what members of his transition are saying, whether the posture of the incoming team is that the idea of maximum pressure on Iran is likely to continue and perhaps increase. But the key issue is what would be the end game for maximum pressure? Because in the first term, there was an ambiguity between where Secretary Pompeo was and his 12 points, which was really about regime change, and where President Trump was, which was that he wanted his own deal and wanted to actually engage Iran and force Iran to come to the table. Now, we won't know that whether that's a pathway or until there is actual engagement happens. So for now, we're looking at what's really the preamble for the administration coming in. But speculating about this, there's a number of things that we have to keep in mind and not think that the past is necessarily prologue. So one is that actually, as I just mentioned, that President Trump wants a deal. I mean, that was his objective the first time. The deal he wants may not be acceptable or doable with the Iranians, but he's not coming in with a view that I don't want to talk to them, I don't talk to enemies, I don't cut deals, but rather I think we have to start from the point of view that he would ultimately want to get a deal with Iran. Secondly, I would say that both Iran and the United States, for them, there are lessons learned from last time. What worked and what didn't work. I mean, the Iran side of it, we can have a separate conversation, but if you're President Trump, I would say that you didn't think that maximum pressure was automatically an outright success. Yes, it worked, it choked Iran, it choked its economy, but it didn't bring them to the table. It actually led to a cycle of escalation in the Gulf that brought the United States and Iran to the verge of war after the lobbing of missiles at the American base and shooting down an American drone. So in a sense, I wouldn't think that President Trump would look at maximum pressure as an unvarnished success. And perhaps if it's applied, it would be much more laser focused on what's the outcome. Thirdly, another things are also clear in the administration's approach. One is that China matters a lot to President Trump. And also, if we thought about what does it mean to deploy the American military on American streets to round up migrants and expel them from the United States, what kind of attention that requires from the military, where does that attention come from, how long will it take? I mean, the domestic sets of issues, along with China, would suggest that there will be certain pressure on President Trump not to escalate in the Middle East. In fact, success with China, success in other arenas requires some degree of stability in the Middle East, which means the pathway for Trump, I don't think, would be escalation, but rather de-escalation. So yes, you may have maximum pressure, but it may be with a much more emphasis on a quick return. Thirdly, it's important to note that the position of the Arab world has changed. When President Trump set in place maximum pressure, the Gulf countries were 100% on board, that he should leave JCPOA and he should put maximum pressure on Iran. That's not the case today, right? The region is somewhere else altogether. UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia have normalized relations with Iran. In fact, the more the pace of war in Gaza has increased, the deeper this relationship has become. Even countries that don't have relations with Iran, like Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt, have started at least an engagement with Iran. I think President Trump will find that other than Israel in the region, nobody else is actually supportive of a policy of escalation and confrontation with Iran. And I think the Gulf countries have come to a conclusion that Gulf security, which is so important to their economic success, is not going to be achieved through maximum pressure. So there has to be a different approach by the United States. Next is that Iran, unlike under Max's first term, is actually sending signals that it's ready to talk to the United States. I mean, from the sort of the new diplomatic team that has come to the fore in Iran, which was the same people who negotiated the previous nuclear deal, to just a few days ago, a senior advisor to the Supreme Leader said on the Supreme Leader's website that Iran is willing and ready to engage the Trump administration. This is very different from when the Supreme Leader said we'll never talk to Trump and we will not engage. And so that's also an important factor. And even if you took as a parenthesis the alleged meeting between Elon Musk and the Iranian ambassador, that's a very strong signal. I said that yes, there will be pressure, but the pressure may translate into a new pathway. Next, I would say that, and also President Trump added to that, has sent also signals of his own. During the campaign, he said that what he is really after, that Iran would not have nuclear weapons, not a nuclear program, that they would not have nuclear weapons, and that he is not after regime change in Iran. This is a much more sharper focus of what the pressure is supposed to achieve, which is very different from the first term. And I would say if they engage this time, it's also important to note that the nuclear issue now is perhaps not the most important thing in the Middle East. Not for the Arabs, not even for the Iranians at some level, and definitely not, and also not for the Americans. That the region, the future of the region, the role of axis of resistance, the role of Iran's proxies, etc., is perhaps more important for everybody. And I think it is likely that if we end up in, US ends up in talking to Iran, the region will be on the table, not because the United States is demanding it, but actually I think Iranians would also want some kind of a stability on that front.
Thank you very much. So you think that they're ready to allow Iran to have the capacity to get a nuclear facilities, but not the atomic bomb, which is what at origin they were saying. They were saying, we do not want to have an atomic bomb, we just want to have the capacity to build it, to become potentially a nuclear target.
Well, it all depends on, once negotiations start, then the starting positions of both sides will be negotiated over. But right now we're in a stage of signaling. So President Trump, on the one hand, is signaling that I'm perfectly willing to choke you again and actually cut your oil supplies even further than last time. But on the other hand, he's saying, I'm also want an end to this, I want a result. And then what he's signaling right now, maybe it's just to entice Iran to the table, that I don't want you to give up your nuclear program as a whole. I just want to make sure you don't have a bomb, which is it's that, how do you decide that and how do you measure that is quite an open question. And that I'm not after regime change. And that's basically almost also what Obama told the Iranians, that I'm not after regime change, I want to negotiate your nuclear program. Now, we'll see, but what I'm saying is that, yes, I anticipate pressure on Iran will increase, but I wouldn't be surprised if that pressure very quickly translates into a process.
I'm sorry. I have to continue asking one other thing. Is this because of a change in internal Iranian dynamics? Are you noticing a move away from the reaction that they might have had at the beginning and the reaction they're having now? Are there new forces coming in that want to have a rapprochement or something close to that with the United States against a previous generation who was radically opposed? Or that's out of the game, that's not?
No, the new forces have come in because Iran as a whole wants an engagement. It originally, before even the Gaza war got in the thick of it, the desire was to find some ways to lift sanctions on Iran in order to stabilize the economy, particularly after the massive riots that rocked Iran in 2022. But right now, I think the priority is also that Iran wants a kind of a major regional ceasefire. It obviously lost massively in Lebanon, and it wants a ceasefire in Lebanon, but also is looking for some kind of a stability in the region as well. And interestingly, my belief is that they're on the same page with their Gulf neighbors on that issue. Nobody wants this war to continue, and so that gives them an incentive to engage the Trump administration.
Thank you very much. By the way, I'm sorry, I gave for granted everybody knew you. I didn't mention that Dr. Varinhasen is a Majid Khadouri Chair, Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and International Affairs at Johns Hopkins University, School of Advanced International Studies. And now we go to my friend, Badr Asif. For you, I have prepared a question, which is something that interests me a lot. And it is, how might Trump reshape US relations with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states? And how might that differ from Biden's approach? In comparison with the current Biden administration, which obstacles to and prospects for a US brokered normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel? Which will be tied with the question I want to ask you later on, more in depth, about the Abraham Accords and other things.
Thank you, Karim, and thank you, Ispi, for the invitation. And let me tell you, I'm feeling the Atlantic Council love. I'm surrounded right and left by the Atlantic Council. Let me.
By the way, I made a mistake. I should have said you are a professor at the University of Kuwait. And,
Thank you. Let me dissect the question into three domains, if you may. So let me start with where the Gulf stands today, and then I'll move into Gulf US priorities in the coming administration, in my view, and then I'll end on the whole notion of Israel, Palestine, and the potential role for the Gulf. So with the first issue, Trump returns to a different Gulf. as our friend Vali has kindly noted. And it's ironically a Gulf that the Trump administration partly reshaped. One of the last acts of the first Trump administration was sealing the intra-Gulf discord between Qatar on the one hand and the other Arab Gulf states, with obvious support from the Kuwaiti mediation, but the US was present in the room in the Al-Ula summit with Jared Kushner in place. And that kind of opened up a whole wave of reconciliation across the region that we still live through until this day. This connects to the détente that took place with Iran, with Turkey, and with other countries in the region. A second moment in which Trump played a role in reshaping how the Gulf sees itself, and actually it's boosting its self-reliance in a way, is the aloof response, if you may, to the 2019 attack on Saudi oil fields and facilities. I say aloof response, but I could say the lack of response. So in a sense, that also reinforced the self-reliance that you see in the Gulf. The Gulf has dealt with Trump. They know what they're going into. They understand that there is unpredictability. There is a transactional reference. And I think they can manage to deal with the impulses that could be contradictory at times, whether it's an interventionist impulse or an isolationist one. Now, when it comes to priorities between the Gulf and the US, there are various domains that I think would be of importance. I put front and center the whole notion of security. If you remember, there were the talks between the Biden administration and the Saudis on a US-Saudi defense pact. I think that will continue, and we'll probably see some fruition into that end. The UAE has had its major defense partnership title, so that will also increase. And Bahrain earlier has tested the waters with a strategic partnership agreement that's the closest to what a defense pact would be. Technology would be another file that I think they would be in agreement with in advancing that partnership forward. I think where you would find some kind of friction that I think still would be manageable is the whole notion of the oil and trade files. Now, as you know, the incoming administration, or Trump particularly, has mentioned that he will be drilling and producing more. That could come into contradiction or a kind of disruption with the plans that the Gulf states have for themselves in both developing their national visions, which are premised on high oil returns, or even this transfer to a post-oil future, which is also premised on high oil returns. There is also a gulf, I would say, or a gap between the two, the Gulf and the US, when it comes to renewable energy. I think there is a sincere effort among the Gulf states in moving into that file, and there is some questioning from Trump and his incoming administration. Now, if we move into the final bucket, if I may, and it's on the Israel-Palestine deal, I think, as the ambassador has mentioned, there will be a doubling down on the relationship with Israel, obviously. There are preferences there and a continuity with the Biden administration. You'll see a revamped version probably of the Abraham Accords, but that would put the Saudis in a bind because, as I've written with my dear friend Maria Fantape in the Foreign Affairs last week, we argue for a Saudi solution. And the Saudis have put out their cards very clearly on the table. They're for the two-state solution. And they've listed it in various ways and means, both in bilaterals and even in public statements. We've seen them launch in the UN last September, the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, which met in Riyadh last month, and a follow-up meeting this month was in Europe. So there will be clear red lines presented from the Saudis on this file, and it would be interesting to see how that moves forward. Again, Trump can surprise us. We've seen his intentions to build and broker a deal. Could he, all bets are off. Could he pursue that, or could he double down on another route like annexation?
Thank you very much. How do you see this playing with the rivalry with China? The fact that China has tried in order to get it into the Gulf, with the agreement between Iran and fostering agreement with Iran and Saudi Arabia, trying to get into business and stuff. Are the United States going to have a strong attitude against this? Are they going to try to bring the Gulf states toward them in order of not fostering an intervention of stronger Chinese, or that doesn't have anything to do to play in the area? In other words, what do you see about the Chinese getting in?
Let me begin with the US. Look, the US is front and center in the Gulf. Okay. So to claim that anyone can displace it at the time being will be a stretch. Doesn't mean that the other powers would not be playing a certain role, as we've seen with the Chinese. But let me explain in terms of great power competition. I don't think the Gulf states would like to view themselves as part of that. They feel that they can work with all partners and that each partner has something to deliver. China is the biggest trading partner, for example, for the Gulf, and this is a relationship that they want to nurture. Russia, they've been very keen on maintaining the OPEC Plus agreement. That is an agreement that has now entered maybe its 8th or 9th year, and it has stabilized oil prices. So that's something that they're trying to work with, as well with the whole Ukraine-Russia conflict. Several Gulf states have played a mediating role in terms of the exchange of different, children or family members, whether it was by the Saudis, the Emiratis, or the Qataris. So I think they see themselves beyond this great power competition, and that they can help in various files.
Thank you very much. Now we turn to Melis Hourma, who's Director of the Middle East Program at the Wilson Center. For you, I have a very easy question. What kind of Middle East will Trump have to reckon with? How will he handle increasing Arab discontent with regards to American unwavering support for Israel? Please, good luck.
Thank you so much, Kareem, and it's great to be here with...
Don't thank me.
No, I will thank you. It's an important question. I mean, my colleagues have already talked about, the different Middle East that he's coming into, with Arabs normalizing more with Iran, with, China, as Badr just mentioned, more economically integrated in the Gulf. We've seen various visits by GCC officials to China, but also China playing a role in, for example, mediating between Palestinian factions beyond just the Saudi-Iran brokering. But I think the one thing that is going to be very challenging to navigate, and perhaps his foreign policy team will care about it, perhaps not, but it's a reality, is that the United States has lost its credibility and standing in the region. I mean, just look at all the different opinion polls that have been conducted. The most recent one that I will reference was published by the Arab Center a few months ago, that showcased that over 90% of those surveyed in 16 countries across the Arab world believe that the role that the United States played in the Gaza conflict was bad or very bad. And when asked about the US influence and US role in the region, more than 50% named it as the source of the instability and the conflict. So a lot of the region, the people, I think that we're always talking about governments and officials, and those are very important discussions, but the people are at the heart of these conversations, and we cannot ignore where people are at. There's a whole new generation across the Arab world that is understanding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for the first time through the current war in Gaza. And of course, for those Palestinians who are scattered across the Arab world, there are familial ties, there are friends, there's an emotional connection, and there's a lot of pain. Israeli society is traumatized by the horrific attacks of October 7th, and there's a lot of pain and anger there. There is also a lot of trauma and pain across the region. And with the various challenges that various countries face, on the social and economic levels, and political disenfranchisement in some parts of the region, those are all ingredients for more radicalization. And that is going to be a challenge. We've already heard multiple intelligence officials in the US and counterterrorism officials talk about the threat of violent extremism and radicalization. So this is a reality that the incoming administration has to deal with. I think the picks that he's made so far, particularly for US Ambassador to Israel, has made a lot of people nervous in the region. Ambassador Jabryansky just mentioned that the one common feature that we know is that support for Israel will continue. And given the picks that we've seen with Ambassador-to-be Huckabee and his views on Israel and former statements such as there's no such thing as Palestinians, for example, it will make things more complicated with key US allies, including Jordan and Egypt that are at the forefront of course, sharing borders with Israel, and probably are the two other countries that have the most to lose after the Palestinians. So those are some of the dynamics that have to be part of it. And then again, like the United States does a lot in humanitarian aid and development aid in the region. And we have to wait and see where the Trump administration stands on continuing this aid, which is much needed, particularly in the Levant, particularly when we're talking about reconstruction, and not just in terms of hardware, but in terms of software, investing in education, in workforce development. As you know, Kareem, the MENA region has one of the highest youth unemployment rates worldwide. So there's a lot to reckon with, and the governments in the region want the United States to play a constructive role, particularly on these issues, but there's also a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and so there will be a lot to reckon with, in addition to the geopolitical dynamics that my colleagues mentioned.
Thank you very much. I know that Paolo Magri and the other guys who worked with me to put me here and will be upset at what I'm doing. I will now take the lead, and I decide to say that I want to ask you one question. I really want our guests to answer. See if it's in the level. And I will ask first to Melissa. You made a big distinction between the regimes and the people, which is something that very hardly is emphasized. When you talk about the Abraham Accords, when you talk about treaties, when you talk about dealings, when you talk about opening up, how much do you think this will count? How much do you think that this is going to be important for for what is going to come in the Middle East? How much do regimes really can have the capability to lead in one direction when the whole population is mostly against that, even though they have no voice that we can hear? And then I will ask Ambassador Dobrynski the same answer from the other side. How much is America, the new administration, you think will be confident that they can lead the whole population towards pushing the Arab world into a deal with Israel and the closer relationship with the United States? How confident you are that the soft power that America has can overcome the fear, the rage, the hate, the rivalry, that we've seen on the ground? For you too is going to come something.
Yeah, thanks, Kareem, for the follow-up. I mean, those sentiments produce a lot of internal pressures on the various governments. And of course, there are countries that witnessed very intense and frequent demonstrations. My native homeland, Jordan, is one of them. Yeah. In other countries, it was more suppressed, but the sentiments and the pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli and anti-American sentiments are very much on display on social media. As a native Arabic speaker, looking at both sides in both Arabic and in English, I see it very visibly. So will it change the direction of the governments? I don't think so, but it does add a lot of pressure. But I think it's important to note that even with all these pressures and all the pain and suffering that people are watching on a daily basis, massacres unfolding live on TV, these governments are still not just in control, but they're still offering normalization by reviving the Arab Peace Initiative and saying, we will still offer normalization with Israel, peace with Israel, if and when the occupation of Palestinian territories ends and a Palestinian state is created. So that has to be also understood and amplified when dealing with the incoming administration.
Thank you very much. This is a great point. This is a great point, which I think I missed in the reading. Thank you very much for this. Vali, do you? No, Ambassador Dobrynski, first of all. Sorry.
You want me to answer? Okay.
Sure. I'm
I
being very
thought you were
mean to
shifting
everybody
gears.
today.
Okay. I'll make 3 brief points. One is I think that the United States going forward and the new administration is absolutely and unequivocally committed to peace. In fact, President Trump, when he ran his campaign, he spotlighted the importance of achieving peace and resolving the conflicts that are existing, not just in the Middle East, but around the globe. I had shared, we were at lunch, a number of us together. I had shared, it was striking to me during the campaign when 20-year-olds to 25, 26-year-old young men were interviewed on TV and asked, why is it that you voted? Who are you going to vote for in this campaign? They said, President Trump. And then the journalist asked, well, why is that? And they said, because he's committed to resolving conflicts, wars, and peace. And we do not want to be dispatched to different conflicts around the globe. So number one, I think he's very committed. He has said it. Two, I think that already his prioritization of the region from the first term sets a very strong foundation. And thirdly, the Abraham Accords was rather historic and very groundbreaking. And in terms of what it sought to achieve, as it was termed, very sustained growth, economic growth, and a kind of vibrancy. Economy also, and when you are economically deprived, that spawns discontent and conflict. And here, I think there was a strong desire to try to look at those areas that would help provide a further foundation for going forward and in the normalization. And I think in this regard that there's going to be a desire for expanding that. If I may mention just one footnote to your response, I want to reinforce what you said. I think in my comments, I tried to lay out that great power competition is playing out. China has definitely gotten in the economic domain. Certainly, it has invested a lot in the region. The United States has prioritized its involvement there, but it's clearly the Gulf countries have chosen multiple paths, not just one single path, and I think that you can expect that.
Thank you very much. I think we are out of time, but I get a couple of minutes just to ask you the same question to you, Vali and Badr. Do you really believe that there is a possibility for the custodian of the two holy sites, for the king of Saudi Arabia, to lead, as of today, moving forward of Saudi Arabia towards Israel and toward the Abraham Accords and towards continuing this very relevant, in other moments, walk, attitude, or behavior?
The short answer is no, for reasons that Badr and Maria Pantapi have outlined in their foreign affairs piece and Badr laid out, and also for reasons that Marissa said about the public mood. So I don't see this actually being doable. I think there is a hangover of the Biden policy on October 6th, that the future of the Middle East is trade corridors, economic progress, and a normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The reality is that if you looked at the Gaza war over the past 2 years, it evolved from a war on Hamas to an expansive Israeli war to reshape the Middle East, a Middle East that has no axis of resistance, has no Palestinians, and at some point down the road, that all the remaining Arab countries would normalize with Israel. And it's very clear that the region is not ready for that. Even the Gulf countries don't seem to be ready for that. I mean, they're more concerned about the first two pieces of this, a war that will continue from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria to Iraq and ultimately to Iran. And a notion that, as Marissa says, is outlined in what the administration is saying, which is they don't envision really a two-state solution. The Israeli Knesset passed a law that it doesn't believe in two-state solution. I mean, what the talk is on the table, nobody talks about two-state solution in reality, other than in think tank areas. The new talk is about annexation of the West Bank, that it may very well be on the table. And so there is a dissonance between the reality that's unfolding before our eyes versus what we talk about. I mean, and I would just say that where Biden may be different, Trump may be different from the past, is that Trump may very well give everything Israel wants on the Palestinians. In fact, following on Ambassador Dobryansky, is because he doesn't think American boys will have to go fight is in Israel, and perhaps public opinion is in Israel. So we're basically arguing about something that I don't see, reflected in reality out there.
Thank you very much, Vali. 1 second. Do you agree or not?
3 seconds.
5, I'll give you 5. Okay, they're going to kill me anyway, so.
I just want to reinforce what Marissa said about the anger in the region, and it's obvious because of all the atrocities and massacres that you see daily on TV, and any person with the logic in his head would have that reaction. Now, there is cautious optimism. I agree with everything that's been said, but the Biden administration has been either unwilling or unable to rein in Netanyahu and his administration. Trump could, if he wanted to. There is that difference. And I think there is an opening there in that, yes, the two-state solution is dead, clinically dead, but there are concerted efforts to revive it, and we need to have an extended hand from the Israeli side to see that security is only guaranteed through peace. You can't continue with conflict and secure yourself this way. Continuing along those lines, and if the Trump administration decides to choose annexation and to push that card further, will haunt them for decades to come. This is not the solution for the Middle East.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone. Thanks a lot. And thanks to our speakers. Fantastic time. Thank you.
Excellent.
Good job.
Really good. Thank you.
Thank you.